Hi everyone. My name's Amany, and I'm the Skills Development Lead for People RDC, and this is within the Health and Medical pillar of ARDC. And welcome everyone. This is actually our first National Skills Forum for 2026, and yeah, it's very exciting to have you all today. So today we'll be discussing with our fantastic panel about what truly makes learning accessible, inclusive, and impactful. Next slide, please. Awesome. But first, I would like to begin by acknowledging the first educators of Australia, so the traditional owners on the land on which we meet today. In my case, I am on Wurundjeri country in Melbourne, and we pay respects to elders past, present, and future, and acknowledge the importance of Indigenous knowledge. And please feel free to share where you are in the chat. Next slide, please. Okay, so now on to some housekeeping. Just keep in mind that this session is being recorded and will later be uploaded onto YouTube. And please feel free to switch on your videos. I can see a lot of you have already done that, but feel free to switch on your videos. Don't be shy to also use the Zoom reactions. And also, questions can be asked by posting in the Zoom chat, and we'll try and monitor them throughout. But if we can't get to them, we'll try and get to them towards the end of this session. Next slide. Yep, so now on to our code of conduct. We do have an expectation for upholding a safe and respectful environment, and we'll pop a link in the chat for more information, but if you have any concerns, please let us know in the chat. Yep, next slide. Okay, so just to give you a little context on this series, especially to those who are here for the first time, it's fantastic to have everyone here. The National Skills Forum are a series that we run monthly, and it's a way for the trainer community to stay in touch between our annual skills summits. Next slide. Yep, and the purpose here is to facilitate knowledge exchange across the trainer community, to showcase digital research skills development activities, and to share resources and best practice across the sector. So everyone here, haven't finished this. So everyone here is welcome to contribute. This is an open space to share what's happening in your world and bring forward questions or challenges that you may have. And today our guests, today our guests will be sharing their expertise, followed by a Q&A session. And we're very lucky to have Giorgia Mori, Gemma Smart, Kimberley Becker, and Hooi Khoo. And their collective experience spans a wide range, including advocacy and research, corporate government, the list goes on. They've got a lot of experience, and I'm very excited to hear and learn more from them. So next slide. Awesome. So today is an introductory session into accessible and inclusive training. So what this entails is what this really looks like in practice and shared by experts with lived experience. So when we talk about accessible and inclusive training, what we mean is equity in learning. So ensuring that people are not excluded by design and that diversity is recognized as a strength rather than the exception. So today features first-hand insights into how to facilitate the equity in learning, including practical strategies for designing and delivering training that is aligned with universal design principles, and actionable tools and ideas that you can apply to create engaging learning environments for everybody. But before we move on to our panel, we wanted to get to know you and the audience just a little bit better so we can all collectively share experiences. So with a show of hands or thumbs up, or if you feel like sharing your experiences in the chat, feel free to write in the chat. My first question is, how many of you have had experience developing or delivering training that was purposely built to be accessible and inclusive? Meh. Nice. We got quite a few. Fantastic. Oh, we've got some in the chat as well. Fantastic. So quite a few of you. Awesome. Okay, so my next question is going to be a little bit more deeper. And again, feel free to state what you think in the chat as well. How many of you are confident to develop or deliver training that is accessible and inclusive? Well, not as many. We got Gemma though. Oh, Liz too. Oh, that's very interesting. Oh, the carpentries is ethos inclusive. Yes, it is. And there is always more to learn. Fantastic. Well, hopefully by the end of this session, we'll have a lot more of you that will be more confident that, yes, it is something that we can always learn more about. So moving on to our panel, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can privately reach out to either me or the Zoom 5 license if you have any questions that you wanted to ask. So first up, we'll go to Giorgia's slide. Yep. So first up, we have Giorgia Mori, who is the BioCloud Training and Communications Officer at Australian BioCommons. So she brings lived experience of disability to her work, where she coordinates national training programs and advocates for accessibility and inclusion, helping trainers reflect on what truly removes barriers to create learning environments where everyone can engage confidently. So Giorgia will walk us through the learner experience and how we can better support to remove barriers. So take it away, Giorgia.
Thank you, Amany, for the introduction. I like how smooth my skin looks like in the photo profile that you have on the slide. I'm not exactly like that, but that's me. My name is Giorgia. I have white skin and brown eyes, brown hair. Today, I'd like to share a few insights from several perspectives as a training professional, as a person with lived experience of disability, as someone from a different cultural background, and as a learner as well. I have one slide for today. That should be next. Yes. The message on the slide is adapted from Charity Peter, a special education teacher. I'm using this to focus our attention on what I'll be sharing in the next few minutes. The slide reads, inclusive learning is not just about presence, it's about designing your training so every learner can thrive. And I'll be sharing a few practical examples of what from my experience genuinely supports learning and what unintentionally creates barriers. When we talk about inclusion, we often stop at presence. We are happy if people show up at our training, we get no complaints. I've been a learner myself to many training events. Sometimes I've learned something, some others I didn't. Thriving looks different for different learners, and I believe the key in allowing learners to fully participate and feel like they belong rather than just fitting into our training. We need to adopt a proactive approach. So let's say I'm a learner, I'm at a training event or at a conference or seminar, and there's a trainer there, and the trainer decides their voice is loud enough, so they don't need a microphone. I'm sure most of us have experienced this. Without a microphone, I can't hear anything, and then I'm not gonna learn anything. Maybe I have a hearing disability. Maybe English is not my first language, and I really need to hear you out loud to understand what you're saying. But the point is, do you really need to know which one is it? The point is that my failing at learning here is not because of an individual or personal trait, it's the outcome of the trainer teaching choices. But yet, I believe we've all witnessed things like speakers not using their microphone or trainers using overly complicated slides or using jargons instead of plain English. Sometimes we are asked if we have accessibility needs, but very rarely we are told what is already in place, for example. The last time I attended a networking event, I had to ask whether chairs would be available, just to sit down throughout the day. And the answer was, yes, of course, we do have chairs. But why is that, of course? So there is this assumption of a default participant, and that is already a barrier. None of these examples stop people from attending, but all of these examples affect whether people can actually thrive. The good news is that there are often small practical changes that we can implement, like using the microphone by default, even if you don't think you need it. Share what accessibility features are already in place so people don't have to guess or disclose. Design slides and delivery of your training to reduce cognitive load using a plain language, having a clear structure in place, and sharing one message at a time. I know that these might all seem obvious, but unfortunately they are not. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. And I think educating ourselves really matters. So joining events like today's event is really important. We all have the capacity to make small changes so that fewer people have to struggle silently, self-advocate, or opt out entirely. In my job at Australian BioCommons last year, we published our first diversity, disability, and inclusion statement, and we saw it as a small step, but it had a real impact. It gave people language, permission, and the confidence to engage. So because of this very short statement, we have now started an inclusion committee, for example. And this same principle applies to learning. If we name inclusion up front, then participation changes. So I guess today, with the panel, we all bring something different. We bring lived experience and practical insight into what supports learning. And I guess from my point of view, I invite you to listen not just for the tools, but for shifts in how you think about a successful learning experience. And that's all for me.
Oh, that was fantastic. Thanks for that, Giorgia. Really, really insightful. Cool. So we'll move on to Gemma Smart, who is a PhD candidate and diversity and inclusion consultant at the University of Sydney. A CAPA board member with lived experience of disability, she has national disability advocacy experience. As a senior research officer at the Centre for Disability Studies, she develops training in accessibility and inclusive research practice. And now Gemma will walk us through universal design for learning, why it's important, and how it can help. Thanks, Gemma.
Thanks, Amany. So I am a pale-skinned woman with bright red hair and metal glasses, and I'm wearing a maroon jacket, which was my mum's from the 70s. So following on from Giorgia, which was a beautiful statement to begin with, I wanted to introduce you to the concept of universal design for learning. If you'd like to go to the next slide. So here on this slide, I have just a couple of points that I'm going to speak to very briefly. What is universal design for learning, which is sometimes called UDL, where it came from and why it helps research training. On the right-hand side of the slide, I have a little diagram which I'm going to speak about, representation, engagement, and expression, an image of a possible diverse learning environment, and the logo for CAST, which I'll get to. So universal design for learning is a framework for designing learning so that it works for the widest range of learners from the start. So what Giorgia was talking about. And it's an alternative to retrofitting accommodation. So instead of deciding that people have to come forward and disclose to you what they need, you try to accommodate for the largest number of people to begin with. So it includes 3 core ideas: that you have multiple means of engagement, so you offer different ways for learners to connect with material and stay motivated. Multiple means of representation, so you present information in more than one format so that people can access it in the way that works best for them. For instance, I use captions, I've got them on now, and that should be a standard. Multiple means of action and expression, so that allows learners to demonstrate their understanding in different ways while still meeting the learning outcomes. And this should be very familiar to you. You know, like I was always very good at exams and presentations, and that's not the norm. Most people prefer like written assessments, but other people don't. So it's all about like providing opportunities to for a learner to show you that they have learnt the material without having to be good at one form of output. So together, those 3 things help us create teaching materials and teaching spaces that are accessible. It all came out of work in the 1990s at the Centre for Applied Special Technology, which is CAST, and it borrows from ideas in architecture. So you're thinking about curb cuts and ramps and things like that. It's taking that same idea that a curb cut is useful for people who are wheelchair users, but it's also helpful for anybody who needs to go up the side of a sidewalk. So, you know, if you have a pram, or if you're pushing a trolley, or if you have a broken leg, it's going to help you. And that basic idea that an accommodation, which might be seen as an accommodation for someone with a disability, will actually be something that more people will find makes an environment accessible. So why does UDL help, or Universal Design for Learning help? Well, As we've already intimated, we meet learners with diverse disciplinary vocabularies, varied research experience, different language backgrounds, competing time pressures, and of course, different access needs. So by providing, by reducing cognitive load, by providing a clear structure and using plain language, by broadening access, by presenting information in different ways and providing different ways to participate, and also increasing the ways in which we can transfer information, so learners' real context, so doing some things that are more applied and some things that are more theory, then we produce a better engagement with material. So finally, I'll just talk about a couple of ways in which you can do this. First of all, provide your information in multiple formats. So you can provide this information. I can speak to you now, but you could also look at, for instance, the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training, which I work with, and they have all of this kind of information in PDF forms or doc forms as well. Provide multiple ways to participate. Allow speaking or typing. I have a voice disorder. Sometimes I can't speak, and it's very annoying if the only way to participate is to speak. Here, of course, we have the chat. That's a way to just include people. Assessment flexibility, again, I've already covered that, but also minimize friction, as Giorgia was saying. Don't just use jargon. If I just jumped in and just said UDL over and over again, you may not actually know what I was talking about. I keep going back to reminding people what that is, universal design for learning. Use real world examples. Use captions by default, use microphones by default, etc. And also access basics. Like people forget this bit where it's just readable fonts and contrast. When you're designing a slide, don't have a very messy background that's very not possible to be read by everybody. Use alt text on key visuals. Provide materials before the session when possible. All this stuff is I think it takes a little bit to set up, but once it becomes the default, then more people can access. UDL, it's not an extra. It should be basically the way in which you produce good quality, accessible training or training in general. And it's important for it to be clear, respectful, and effective. But keeping in mind that there is no such thing as universal access. There will always be competing kind of access needs. So this is just about broadening that group of people which you are including by default. So that's my little introduction to UDL. I do a lot of work with UDL, but also with co-production, co-design, inclusive research design. So I'm happy to speak to that later. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for all those that information. That was really, really great. I was writing this all down as quickly as possible. It was awesome. Thank you so much, Gemma. Okay, so finally we have Kimberley Becker and Khoo from Defence Australia. So to just introduce them, Kimberley Becker is a passionate learning and professionalisation specialist and inclusion advocate. She's an award-winning leader. She received a LearnX award for best technology and a gold commendation for defence. Kimberley also runs 2 successful YouTube channels, Explore It and Unbox It, and she also holds a professional certificate in web accessibility compliance. Khoo is a technologist with lived experience who is passionate about making the world more accessible and inclusive. So a direct quote from Khoo is that he has nearly 40 years experience across different industries, long enough to remember when the cloud just meant weather. He loves using technology to create real-world impact and has spent over 15 years facilitating, designing and creating digital and physical learning environment and content that are accessible and inclusive. And today they'll now take us through some practical strategies and actionable tools.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that introduction, Amany. Hello, everyone. It's an absolute privilege to be here with such talented and passionate advocates for inclusion. Thank you to the ARDC for providing this platform to share what we've learned so far, our lived experiences, and how together we, as a community, we can continue to do better. My name is Kimberley Becker, currently acting as an assistant director within the Defence Learning Academy Project Management Office. Gosh, that's a mouthful. And I'm formerly the Quality Assurance and Compliance Manager for Digital Learning Solutions. For accessibility, I'll briefly describe myself. I'm a light-skinned woman with chin-length auburn brown hair. I have clear frame glasses, and today I'm wearing a navy blue dress with pearl drop earrings. I'm also using a headset as I am deaf in my left ear and hard of hearing in my right. So it's not just my personality that's loud. So let's move on to the slides. All right. And what I'll do, I'll also briefly hand over to Hooi. In one moment, he is, I'm telling you, greatness and an absolute privilege to work with such a man with so many skill sets. So anyway, let's get into it. So we're going to start off with the first slide, please, which is accessible inclusive training. So accessibility equals quality learning. And so this is something we're very passionate about here at the Department of Defence. In the last couple of years, it has really been highlighted from a directorate from the government to that inclusion is one of the biggest focuses right now, to ensure that everybody has the opportunity for equality across the board, wherever we are. So quality assurance and compliance is where I come and fit into this puzzle. It enables participation for all learners, improves usability for everyone, and alignment with digital experience policy, and that covers 4 standards within the digital experience, which is digital service standards, and that sets the requirements for designing and delivering digital government services, digital inclusion standards, and that sets the requirements for inclusive and accessible digital government experiences. Oh, yes, I thought I repeated myself there, sorry. Digital access standards, so sets the requirements for agencies to reduce duplication of entry points, supporting unified access and digital government services for people and businesses, and digital performance standards, which sets the approach for monitoring digital service performance and using insight to drive ongoing improvement. We also align to WCAG 2.2 level AA and APS and defence obligations. Next slide, please. Okay. So, Buhui, did you want to take us through this next slide and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Kimberley, and thank you for the introduction. I'm Buhui. I have lived experience. I'm actually almost deaf in both my ears, and I do a lot of screen reading and lip reading. So I'm a passionate technologist that I bring my skill into the digital learning space to create accessible digital and physical space as well. So I'll start with the what good accessible design looks like. You have to bake in accessible inclusion at the very start of the design. It's not an afterthought. And we always use one of the instructional designer model called ADDIE, ADDIE, and that represents analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. And the A part, the ADDIE analysis part, is very important because it helps you to bring your stakeholders, like us, we bring our stakeholders, our course owners on the journey to find out what the user or the learner journey is all about. It's not just about ticking the box, it's understanding who they are, what delivery methods is suitable, what are current skills and technological knowledge levels, what do they need to learn, and what are the learning environments they are in, and what are constraints, and what are the desired learning outcomes. We need to have that in mind at the start, so that will help us guide the structure, the navigation, the content, and how do we actually make our content work for diverse users. That people might use keyboard, screen readers, and there are people with different learning what I call styles. So some of you might know VARK, the VARK approach, visual, auditory, or readers, or kinesthetic learners. So there are multiple ways to engage with the content. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of the tools and technology, I think I'll pass that back to Kimberley to cover this one before I come back to the e-learning authoring tools.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So part of what we do in the Department of Defence, we have rigorous quality assurance checks, and some of those checks are having automated checks for early issues. Manual testing is critical, so that quality assurance piece there. When we do that manual checking, so we actually have a team of quality assurance testers that actually do rigorous WCAG testing, and we do this also with UX team as well in the development stage, I guess, before it comes to that end final quality assurance check. But also we have screen readers that we use, which is JAWS and Narrator. And Narrator is a built-in tool that everyone's got if you've got Microsoft. And keyboard only navigation testing. So with that Narrator, you basically put your headset on or have a speaker on, and you turn on your narrator, and you can just tap away and listen to see if it flows. Basically, what you've placed on your page flows from A to B, and you can navigate to the next page and so forth. So, all right, next slide, please. Handing back to you, Bahui.
Thank you. We love to do tag team here. Kimberley and myself are very close together. All right. So in terms of e-learning authoring software, there are quite a number of e-learning authoring software out there, and I'm sure quite a number of you who have actually raised your hand just now about you have to create a content. There are multiple ways to do this. You can do it in HTML only, or you can use authoring tools like Articulate, Lectora, Captivate, and all that. So very important is that we comply to. I'm going to read this out. Web Content Accessibility Guideline, WCAG, 2.2 level AA. And we also create what we call our own Defense Digital Content Design Development Standards. So that is our document that defines what are the requirements, not just the WCAG requirement, but the requirement for the output, the published content, what level of images that we're going to put in there in terms of to keep the images small so that you can load it faster for people with low internet bandwidth. So it's a holistic approach to not just its disability and accessibility, but its overall user experience. And even though we claim to be level AA, we love to also add in additional things that make sense. Like I say, we don't just tick the box. We have 4 additional AAA criteria, such as the link purpose. So, for example, we don't put anything like click here to access things. We actually put the link that's meaningful. It's the title of the link itself. So that when the screen reader reads it, they know what the link will do and where the link will bring them. And we love our jargons, and just as our previous speakers mentioned, it's all about, we use a lot of abbreviation jargon, so we want to make sure that that is covered as one of AAA criteria, and keeping the reader level accessible as well. So the language is important. Unusual words and all that have to be covered as part of the additional AAA criteria. So we also try to bring people on a journey with us, not just our internal developer, but anyone who wants to build content within Defense. We created a cookbook, we call it the guide, on techniques on how to make your content meet each of the WCAG criteria. And the idea is that when people continue to do this, it becomes a habit. When, for example, somebody puts an image on a course content, automatically I need to put an alt text. Or if there's a video, I need to put a caption, transcript, or audio description for the visually impaired people as well. So we want to make it a muscle memory, a habit across the Defense developer ecosystem. Next slide, please. And now I'm heading back to Kimberley.
Thanks, Bahui. Okay, so these are some hot tips for you when you're dealing with external partners and some non-negotiables. So accessibility must be explicit in contracts. So when you're getting that work done, you want to make sure that you are looking out for providers and contractors that actually have that WCAG certification or web design. There's a professional certificate in web accessibility and design, and that's the one that Amany mentioned that I've both Bahui and I hold, and that was through the organisation what was it? University of South Australia, sorry. So Uni SA provides that service. Also that include digital content design development standards in contrast, design and test WCAG to WCAG 2.2 AAA. The provider must have a qualified accessibility verifier. So just as I've said, so no verification, don't sign the contract. So moving on to you, Hooi.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about the learning, like and as mentioned earlier about the different ways to learn, we are starting to shift from the traditional, e-learning content, like SCORM content or the Click Next content, into more interactive, engaging content. So serious games and simulations that uses the video game engine. For example, so some of you who might know, the games that people play, Fortnite. The video game engine behind it, we are actually using the video game engine behind it to create e-learning content, video games kind of learning. And accessibility has to be designed at the very start of these games because it's a different medium altogether. And how do we make game accessible? We also tested the game appetite within Defense by creating what we call a escape room in one of our training, which is quite challenging to deliver because it's a serious topic, quite dry content, and people are getting fatigued out of that. So we created a game inside the game, inside the learning package, where people have to solve clues, collect and answer questions to get out of that escape room. We also look into total learning architecture. So this is where the trend is moving, where we're not just going to record people's learning within the learning management system, the traditional learning management system. We are looking at collecting information about learner journey beyond just the training. How do they use the skill? Have they demonstrated the capability? Have they demonstrated competency, skills, and all that? So it requires the user-centric approach rather than a top-down. You got to go do this training. We're not telling you what training you got to do. You own your training. You decide what you want to learn and then how you apply that. And that requires experience API as something for you all to look at as well, if you want to research more of that. One thing that I want to point out as a closing statement here is it's always a constant challenge within any organization about time-sensitive training content. And you want to apply the gold standard accessibility and inclusive design into all training, but that takes time. So there's a balance between having a perfect solution out there that covers everybody versus what is a minimal viable product or minimal viable capability that we could put out there and come up with iterative development and provide alternative versions to include others, and while still meet the requirement to have that time sensitive content delivered. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kimberley and Hooi, for those tips and tricks and all of that. That was really, really greatly appreciated. So now we'll be moving on to our panel questions. And these were questions that were asked at registrations, but if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. So we'll be moving on to this portion now. And this question, it does stem back from what you were talking about, Hooi, about the challenges and the time sensitivities. But I wanted to ask this of the entire panel. What's the greatest challenge making training accessible? So we had some from Kimberley and Hooi. Giorgia and Gemma, what do you think of in your experiences? What's the greatest challenge making training accessible?
Do you want to go first, Giorgia?
I could go first. Yes, I think I've touched on this a little bit in what I've shared earlier. There needs to be a change in mindset. What happens is that we all think having to include accessibility in our training, in the design, in the way that we deliver, requires a lot of work, a lot of steps. It's not only developing the content and setting up all of the admin behind the training. It's also more effort in trying to make things accessible and inclusive. And I don't believe this being really true. I believe the way that we should think about training is the way that we think about hosting a dinner with our friends. We all think about, what we want for them. We know our friends. We know that, they might have food allergies. We think about the environment, we're going to be all comfortable in sitting during dinner, after dinner. Do we want some drink beforehand? This is the same approach that we should all apply when we host other people in a new environment. We are proper hosts, and it should be. If you are a trainer, I guess we all do this because of passion, and it should be fun, and we love our job, and it doesn't really require a lot more work. So it's this change in mindset, and hearing more about these as well. It's great to hear events like this, but I can see that there is still some resistance in some workplaces, and there is a lot of advocacy that we need to do, and it requires a lot of energy, much more energy than actually designing training that is accessible and inclusive. So it would be great if there was a way to I don't know, raise more awareness and have people think about training the same way that they think about their private lives.
And Gemma speaking. I agree with that, and I think that one of the things that comes up a lot, obviously I'm coming from the university sector, but I do work across different contexts, and what comes up a lot is that it has to be a combination of cultural change at the ground level, so students asking or learners asking for change, but really the biggest challenge is senior leadership and management getting on board with that. Even if you have lovely policy, which is good, I mean, that's a good step, translating that policy into business as usual and everyday practice requires a whole of organization approach, and everyone has to be on board with that. And if there is resistance, it's usually resistance in a kind of outdated view that, essentially, if you're giving accommodations or you're doing this, that somehow people are getting they're getting advantages somehow, or this will reduce the quality of education. Obviously, that is false. Well, I hope that's obviously. If you've attended today, I kind of think maybe you do think it's obviously. But when you do have, that kind of management level attitude or a fear of really becoming a more inclusive organization and what that would say to the rest of the world, I mean, essentially you just have to have people on board, and it's that cultural change element that is the most challenging. And I think if we start thinking of it more like the curb cut example, or something even more that everyone uses, right? Like a mobile phone, a touch screen. Touch screens were developed for people with disabilities to use. They weren't developed for everybody. And now everyone uses touch screens without thinking about it. And I think if we think of any one of these changes, no matter how much work they take in the first little instance, as something that will improve the lives of everybody, then that cultural change is a little more palatable. But yeah, that's what I think that the biggest challenge is.
I'll go next. I totally agree with you, Giorgia and Gemma, about the culture change, and we had similar journey, and we are so blessed that we have advocates. And when I started in defense, I was given the opportunity to share my lived experience and explain how does all this translate into additional cognitive load to me in a day-to-day operation. How can everybody help me? A simple thing like, can everybody turn on their camera so that I can read their lips during meetings? Or can we all use Microsoft Teams so that, or Zoom, or any virtual meeting platform that has closed caption? So this is the culture change until someone actually explain how they feel and what are the actions they have to take to be able to function, and then people can have that empathy and say, yeah, I think we need to do something about that, rather than going down the path of policy or trying to use a stick method and say, hey, we have to comply, tick the box and that kind of stuff. But coming from the angle of what are we doing to help other people to be able to function day to day without additional cognitive load. Now, apart from the time challenge we face at work, is also the challenge about does accessibility equals no longer fun or no longer engaging content? That's a very common question, and I say no. It's a matter of it's not just plain text or all text kind of thing. No, you could still make things fun, but just be mindful about the the technique you use and do what we call user research. So we have a user experience team, and her name is Julie in our team. She's amazing, and we use her team to say, can you do user research for us, find out how does this thing work. And we also work with the assistive technology committee of practice, and we do research there as well and find out what type of assistive technology people are using out there. Simple things like JAWS, for example, screen readers. What are the common settings that people set on their screen readers? Not having JAWS is not just that's it. You have to understand how people use it and how could you position your content to be optimized for that experience. So user experience is a challenge for us because we have gone from a low accessibility maturity to a quite, I would say, a proud level right now, but I think we're still low at the user experience level, and we're working towards that. I think user experience is very key, and that has to go hand in hand with the accessibility design, and that's why we have that digital experience policy that covers both accessibility and the experience as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I really, really love all the examples that you guys gave as well, especially with hosting the dinner. Because, if there are people that are unhappy, if there are people that, have allergies, if you don't accommodate for that, then no one's going to be happy, correct? Like you want it to be, and to think of yourself as a host when producing training is such a great way to, it's such a great perspective. Cool. So just wanted to remind everyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We still have more questions that we received prior to during registration, which I'll work off. But if anyone has any questions as they're speaking, please feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, so another question that we received, which kind of touches on what we were talking about, the challenges, is about how we can move towards being accessible by default. Now, we did talk a lot about cultural changes, and we did talk a lot about the tensions between bureaucracy and culture changes, but maybe we can get into a little bit more depth into about how we can move towards being accessible by default and remove the burden of incidental everyday advocacy.
So I'll start off on that, and let's look at technology. Technology, new technologies that are out there. Invest, get companies to research and invest in something that's going to be a quality product. And look, Hooi, you may want to lead on this tangent because this is your forte, but it's definitely one of those key things.
Yeah, I think, look, technology is great, but also technology can also become a hindrance because I have to be careful about that because, sometimes we say, oh, I'm a developer, I could do this, I want to do this. And look, you don't do it just because you can do it. You do it because does it make sense? Right. And it's very interesting because I saw a question that just came on the chat as well related to this. Like, people want to learn how to start. The most important is like, yes, culture is one thing, but where do I start? How do I create the first learning that is accessible, inclusive? Apart from the usual, go online and Google training and, go look at the W3C organization training or go to accessible training. I think one of the advantage we have today is the use of AI. If you actually have AI, a lot of us, you can talk to AI and say, hey, I want to create a training. I want to start. So where do I start? You'll be surprised at what you get in terms of, and you probably but remember the A part, in the AD model. Who is your audience? What do they need to learn? what are the environment, all that, so that how to make that inclusive. But once you do that over and over again, it becomes muscle memory that you start to think about. Okay, I'm gonna do this. What do I need to do next? What do I need to do next? And it comes naturally. Yes, it takes practice, but do not be discouraged if you, or do not be fearful about how, oh, this is creating an e-learning that's accessible is hard. No, most of the new e-learning tools already come with built-in function that helps you check. When you hit the publish button, a lot of them now say, here are all the accessibility things that you got to do. And I'll put an image there. I can quickly put an alt text in there. Alt text is just a descriptive text. It's nothing. It's not rocket science. Anyone can do it. If you can look at the image and imagine, I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to imagine what your alt text should work in a way that I can close my eyes and listen to alt text, and I can imagine what's in front of me. That's as simple as that, right? So there's always the fear of height. Right? Don't know where to start, but take the first step, and you'll be surprised. It's not too hard.
Gemma speaking. Can I add to that too? That's beautiful. Yes, take the first step. And I noticed there was a comment in the chat basically saying that take one step, any step. And I do think there's a comment from Liz Stokes in the comments that says that fear seems to stop so many people from trying something different in case they quote unquote get it wrong. And I think, while I acknowledge that, doing something is generally better than doing nothing. And being really open and receptive to hearing from your learners. Now, there's a tension here, and I just want to address it. It shouldn't really be on learners to consistently come to you and disclose their medical information. So just like you were asked in this event, but also probably many events, like, do you have any accessibility requirements? That kind of question, someone can describe what they need as opposed to who they are or what they experience. And I think that's important. You're not asking for their private medical information. So when I say captions, I don't have to disclose to you that I have ADHD. I'm happy to disclose that, but I shouldn't have to, right? And then when you are in an environment where someone perhaps forgot to disclose, or they disclose kind of in the moment, you have to be willing to work with that. So for instance, I was a learner in some training recently. It was a bad voice period. I have a thing called spasmodic dysphonia. They asked everyone to go around the room and do an introduction. I put mine in my chat. When it got to me, the speaker said, Gemma's go. And I said that. A couple of people said, Gemma, put it in the chat. And she said, well, Gemma doesn't want to introduce herself, and then moved on. I was like, of course I did. And I actually made the accommodation for myself. So it's about being kind of, interactive. And in the end, I had to disclose that I had a voice disorder, and it was a big thing. I shouldn't have had to do that, right? Or I could have had laryngitis for anyone, all anyone knew, right? So it's about just... And also just remembering, as I said, there's no such thing as universal design. There is theories that move towards it, but someone with a migraine disorder potentially can't go in rooms with overhead lights. Someone with low vision needs bright lights. You're going to have these conflicts. And it's just about managing that and the learners that you actually have in the room.
Spot on. That's great. Cool. We're just, I think we have time for one more question. And let's see. Okay. So, see if there's any questions in the chat. From Fran Trench, is there anything we need to know how to improve your participation in? I think this was regarding asking participants that were in training. Yeah, I guess that's a really great way of starting that out. Okay, so one of the questions from registration was, so we'll talk more about the physical space. And so can you give some examples of adaptive accommodations that trainers would consider and still trust that they will maintain engagement for a whole workshop?
I think I'll start here as well, because I have experience in that space. So I think, I believe the very important thing again comes back to the same usage of adding A in the physical space. Like, understand your attendees, or you're in a physical space, know your audience, right? Find out the accommodation needed beforehand. Either through the registration forms, or, just like you ask, do you have any dietary requirements? Maybe you can ask a question. Do you need any accommodation? And then, without asking whether someone's in a wheelchair or not, you could even plan, like, I'm going to make sure that the room I select for the training is going to be accessible. Is it on the ground floor, or is it on the upper floor with lift access? Is there a ramp into the building? This simple stuff, you think about, because I remember when I was having a mobility challenge experience, trying to get from home to a venue requires multiple hours of planning. How do I get to that place? So your accessibility journey starts from home, not only on your venue. How will your attendees get to your venue, and then from the venue to the building, to the room that you're going to conduct your training? Think about all that as well. One of the few examples I've actually used is, if you're going to put a video up on the screen for your training, you might have closed caption, but there might be people with visual challenges. You might want to have large print transcript available that you can distribute if needed. You might have, the one thing that I'm very proud of is I actually managed to convince the senior leadership to put screens on all four walls of the training room, because that makes it easy for anyone sitting anywhere in the room, regardless of how you set the room up, there will be a screen in front of that person. So imagine someone with some challenges in terms of mobility. They don't have to shift their seating. They can just know that there is a screen in front of me. I can actually engage with the content anytime. And screens are quite cheap nowadays as well. I'd also like to find out if someone comes with a wheelchair. If that's the case, then what I do is I actually purposely set the room seating position fixed for each attendee with the names on the table, and I remove the chair beforehand. If someone comes with a guide dog, for example, I always make sure that we have a bowl of water for the guide dog. And you might also prepare a quiet room nearby in case you want to have a space for the guide dog and the attendee to have their own time when it's quiet time. So, so it's very important. The key thing is to understand your audience, know them up front. We're a bit kind of fortunate that some of these attendees declare their, need upfront in the HR system, and we could actually, when someone registers, straight away we know, okay, we have attendee who needs some reasonable adjustment. Let's do that. So these are just some sample strategies, and for the rest of the panel, please feel free to chime in.
If I can add on that, I think in addition to all of this, we should also consider, once you are physically able to engage in the space and you have everything that you need in terms of technology and screens and chairs and everything, learning is also like a lot of learning is about your brain, right? You're there and you can follow the training and you can listen, and then there's a lot that has to do with delivery itself. Like I like the quote, less is more. I really love it, and I can see how it applies on so many things. And we live in this fast-paced world, and we are uncomfortable with silences, and we want a bunch of interactivity, and we worry about being boring because there is only text, and we want a bunch of widgets and fancy things. But if we could only stop a little bit more and give time, give silence, being comfortable with silence. There are so many people that need time to process information. And there are always, some people that are always very loud in the room, and they can answer questions and finish exercises just like that. They are always, raising their hands. And for someone, for example, that operates in different languages, like I need time to think, translate, and I have to translate the question, translate the exercise, and then I have to translate what I want to say in response to what the trainer is asking. But by the time I've done all of this, all of the English speaking, people have already answered before, be like, I'm a slow learner, and a lot of people are like this. So if we can just, take deep breaths, everyone, and slow down and think that it's okay to take things like slower, include a little bit less in our training, but make sure that everything that we share with our learners, all of our knowledge, is actually processed, and people can go out of the training having learned something, remembering something, and having had a positive experience.
Yeah, such great advice, just to slow down, process, allow people to have time to reflect as well. That's fantastic. And I think that's a fantastic note to end on, because we only have 3 minutes. Kit, if you can share the last couple of slides before we say goodbye. Fantastic. Okay, so thank you all. Before we wrap up, so we weren't going to leave anyone empty-handed. So Kimberley has kindly put together an accessibility testing guide for digital training content, and that's free and open to access. It's on, up on, not Zenodo. Zenodo, yeah, it is Zenodo. And I encourage you all to open it and download it. Download the guide for future training development. So we've got the QR code there, and we'll put the link in the chat. We'll send it to everyone. Next slide, please. Okay, so thank you for attending. Thank you so much for our presenters. Really appreciate you giving your time and experience. And we're always happy to receive feedback, and we welcome your suggestions and recommendations on what you'd like to see. Next slide. Yep, and our next skills forum will be on coaching researchers outside of the comfort zone. So if you're interested in attending, it'll be on March 12th. Follow the link in the chat to reserve your place. Next one. Yep, and also, finally, for our upcoming events, we invite you to join us for an in-person 2-day Indigenous Data Governance Masterclass. It's on the 18th and 19th of June at Union House at Adelaide University. And yeah, it should be fantastic and very informative. So yeah, feel free to register to reserve your place. Next slide. And yeah, thank you so much for everyone attending today. And thank you to our presenters. Hope you found this informative, and see you in the next one. Thank you.